A couple of weeks ago, a coworker of mine rolled over his dump truck fully loaded with gravel. And even though this was a tragic event, I do believe that there's plenty of lessons to be learned in mistakes just as much as success. So at the end of this video, I want to share the lessons that I learned from a tragic event, all in an effort to bring some awareness to drivers. For the sake of this driver's privacy, I'm going to leave out his name and just call him AR. So a couple of Thursdays ago, I had actually had the day off of work. And sometimes this happens in the dump truck world. If they don't have a whole lot of jobs, they try to make sure all the drivers get a few hours. So they spread out the workload, have some guys take a couple of days off, some guys work a couple of days just so they can spread it around. And I want to be clear that the events that took place are being told from my perspective. And I believe this is important because I can only share what I've seen and heard. So that Thursday, I was just kind of hanging out and relaxing. And about halfway through the day, I got a phone call from one of the dispatchers in the office. And I guess within their scheduling software, there was an error and it was showing I was working that day even though I was off. So not only was there an assumption that I was working, but that I was also working a specific job with AR. So the dispatcher asked me if I had eyes on AR as they were trying to get a hold of him and weren't able to reach him. And at that point, I let them know of the error and that I was home and no, I didn't have eyes on him. At the time, I really didn't think a whole lot about this and I hung up the phone and went back to relaxing. And about an hour had passed when I got a call from one of the other dispatchers. This time they were asking if I was available to come into work for a couple hours. And I said, yeah, I'm not really doing a whole lot. Sure, I can come in. What's going on? And at this point, they informed me that AR had rolled his truck, and they were requesting that I go out with a dumpster in order to help clean up the gravel that had spilled. And I said, sure, that's no problem. Is AR okay? And he said, we're not really sure right now. There was an ambulance that did take him to the hospital. So I said, okay, well, just keep me updated on that. I'm getting ready to head out now. Now, being that I personally have been involved in a rollover accident, if you haven't heard that story, I'll leave a link down below. But in that instance, it was rough, but it really wasn't all that bad. So I figured he would have a couple of bruises and that would be about it. And as I was climbing into the truck, getting ready to head to the accident to get all that stuff picked up, I got a phone call saying that somebody local had already taken care of it and that I was no longer needed. So at this point, since I was already prepared to be out of the house, I had asked what hospital they took AR to so I could go and visit him, just to check in on him, make sure he was doing all right. Well, they told me the town that the accident had occurred in, so I started heading in that direction towards that local hospital. And about a quarter of the way there, I got a phone call saying no, he was transferred to a different hospital in a bigger town nearby. So at this point, I still wasn't sure why he got transferred, but nevertheless AR did, so I was heading towards that direction. So I had found where I needed to be and I went to speak with one of the nurses. And that nurse got me checked in and directed me to where AR was located. As I walked into the area, all I seen on the bed was a blanket puffed up a little bit. I couldn't see anybody's face, any legs, any arms, anything. And as I walked to the head of the bed, AR came into view. And to say it was a shocking sight is a definite understatement. And as AR came into view, the first thing I noticed was a neck brace. And immediately after, I noticed a huge laceration on his lip, coupled with the entire side of his face smeared in dried blood. Now for me, this was a lot worse than I expected. In an effort to stay calm, I announced my presence. Hey AR, how you doing? You doing okay? And the only thing that could come out of his mouth at the time was groans. You know, as a kid, when you fall on your back or you get punched in the stomach and the wind gets knocked out of you, those were the sounds that I was hearing from AR, and I automatically thought the worst. But after a few seconds, he said, there's no brakes, no brakes, no brakes. So my mind started racing about what could possibly happen, what happened, how'd the accident take place, and he began to tell me his side of the story. So according to AR, he was coming down a hill towards an intersection. When he was pressing on the brakes of the trucks, the pedal went all the way to the floor, and he says he wasn't able to stop the truck at all, and he was pushing and pushing on the brakes and he couldn't get it to stop. And coming towards that intersection, he noticed there were a couple of cars crossing the intersection. So realizing there were no brakes and hoping to avoid hitting those cars, he cut his wheel to the right. And being that dump trucks are quite top heavy, when he turned to the right, his truck went to the left, causing him to land on the driver's side. He had stated that he was only going about 35 miles an hour when he started to try to slow down. And he said the last thing about the accident that he remembered was tipping over, and after that, everything went dark. And when he woke up, the first thing he remembered was a guy asking him if he liked helicopters. At that time, AR was getting ready to get transferred via med flight to a larger hospital. After he told me this, I was relaying this information back to dispatch as they were checking in with me to check on him. And after about 30 minutes of sitting there, a nurse came into the room to describe all of his injuries. And it turned out that AR had 4 major lacerations on his left hand, his left elbow was fractured, He had a broken bone in his cheek, as well as that original laceration on his lip that I noticed right away. But the good news is, according to the nurses at the time, he didn't have any major internal injuries. And despite AR being in really rough shape, he was going to survive, and that was good news. However, knowing a little bit about AR, he doesn't have a whole lot of family in the area. It's only him and his dad. And his dad has a mountain of health issues on his own, and AR actually takes care of him. So knowing that AR wouldn't have anybody to give him a ride home or to look after him, I made the decision to go ahead and stay with him until they released him so I could get him home. And during the time of sitting with AR in the hospital, I was in pretty steady contact with the company. And after I told them AR's recollection of events, they had informed me that one of the in-house mechanics gave that truck the all clear that morning, meaning that according to him, there was no notable mechanical issues with the truck that would cause a safety problem. So with that in mind, this automatically brings up the question of who's telling the truth. Was the truck A-okay and didn't have any issues with the brakes? Or was there a massive mechanical oversight that caused these brakes to fail? And I wish I could give an answer to that question, but at this time, it is currently still under investigation, so any news on that has yet to be shared. That next morning, AR was released from the emergency room at about 1 a.m. At that point, I got him back to his house, made sure he was set up and safe, and planned to reach out to him in following days to make sure he was alright. So fast forward about a week and a half, and I get a call from AR asking if I could give him a ride after an upcoming surgery. Now, this upcoming surgery actually happened just yesterday, and knowing that he doesn't have really any family in the area, of course I obliged. Now, on the ride home yesterday, AR was still really feeling the effects of the anesthesia, but as we were getting pretty close to his house, he started to wake up a little bit more and talk to me. And while I didn't talk to the doctor personally, he said that the doctor said that there was pretty severe nerve and tendon damage in his hand, and he may never regain feeling in some of his fingers. But outside of that, AR is recovering quite well, and I'm truly looking forward to the day where I'm able to drive with him again. So all that being said, what are the major lessons that I learned from this event? The first major lesson, always do a pre-trip. Pretty much every vehicle is literally held up by glorified balloons, and these balloons can pop at any minute. Not just that, but there's a ton of other systems in the truck that if they are to fail, it could be a catastrophic safety event. We're talking brakes, tires, engine, transmission, drivetrain, even down to lights, even though that might not seem like a huge safety deal. So it's super important to check your vehicle before you take off and make sure everything is the way it's supposed to be. The second big takeaway from this is just because a mechanic says that a vehicle is ready to rock and roll doesn't mean that you should inherently trust this person. Some are in-house mechanics, some are outside mechanics, but none of their lives are on the line going down the road. So if you get any mechanical work done on the truck, number one, make sure that you understand what occurred on the truck. And if possible, have the mechanic point out the specific areas that they worked on. Generally, if you're getting work done at a repair shop, you'll get a printout of all the work that they did on the truck. But it's important for you as a driver to go back behind them and make sure it was done. And finally, as drivers, we have the final say. Despite what brokers, companies, or dispatchers will tell you, you absolutely have the right and the responsibility to refuse to drive that truck if you feel it's in any way unsafe. If the truck you're driving doesn't meet DOT requirements, if there's mechanical issues that you've reported and they have not been addressed, or even if you just hear a funny sound that makes you feel uncomfortable, it is your duty as a truck driver to ensure that those problems get addressed. Not just for your safety, but the general motoring public safety as well. We literally drive 80,000-pound bullets down the road. And if these vehicles are not taken care of properly and you decide to get behind the wheel, this could end in serious injury or even mass casualties. So it's your responsibility to tell the company, this truck is unsafe to drive and I refuse to drive it until it gets fixed. And if a company refuses to fix the equipment or retaliates for you refusing to drive, there are resources available to you to report these issues. You can go online to the FMCSA National Consumer Complaint website, or NCCDB. You can also reach out to the FMCSA by phone, and the phone number for that is 1-888-DOT-SAFT. So drivers new and old, if you've never listened to any of my advice before, I hope this information helps, and I hope you understand that there are resources available if your voice is not being heard, and it's completely acceptable to utilize these resources. The bottom line is no company can force you to drive a vehicle that is unsafe. A company cannot force you to drive if you have not got enough sleep, and ultimately a company has no right to retaliate if you refuse to drive during these unsafe conditions. So that's going to be it for this one. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. All right, bye.